GilgitBaltistan or northern area for past 70 years. There is a vast amount of literature which is available on the Indian side of the line of control, but there is very little known on the other side, and which is what my book tries to bring to you. And it is based almost entirely on Pakistani UN and international literature. I didn't want any dispute about facts. They would still challenge my conclusions, but at least the facts cannot be challenged, even by Pakistanis. And I have used Pakistan, contemporary Pakistan, as the plane of reference rather than comparing it with the Indian side, because there's always a debate. Somebody who's your terrorist is somebody else's freedom fighter. But I have looked at the developments there, which have been under Pakistan's control for 75 years, in terms of Pakistan's stated positions. But before I go further, let me bring out one fundamental difference between positions of India and Pakistan. And this is, it's not a territorial issue for us. It's a question of ideology. Pakistan was a state founded on an idea. It didn't have a history. And they have an ideology, and we also have an ideology. So their contention is, or was and is, that Kashmir, being a Muslim majority state, should be part of Pakistan. It's extension of the two-nation theory. And in our case, we believe that Kashmir, in a small sense, represents what India is. India is not a Hindu Rashtra. We have chosen a secular constitution. There are, deviations, and there's a lot of debate currently. But I have lived in Pakistan, and you can read about it. So there's a huge difference, and that is the basic contention here. But now let me just show you. This is the Kashmir state. The crest of Kashmir is this purple area. And this bulge, which you see in the northwest, this is called northern area. This small extension, this is a thin sliver of territory running north-south. This is across the Jammu border. This is called Azad Kashmir. Now, we consider this entire area as POK or POJK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir or Pakistan Occupied Jammu Kashmir. They only call this area as Azad Kashmir. What is the difference? It's in terminology. This is a huge difference because northern area, which is actually occupied by Pakistan, is 85% of Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and this they have absorbed, and they don't want to talk about it. And this was done right in the beginning. It's this tiny area which is a rump, 15% of the territory. This is what is left and of POK and what they call Azad Kashmir. So this tells you something about Pakistan's policies. Now, when did this separation take place? There are different versions, and the current version dates it to Karachi Agreement of 1949. This was an agreement between Pakistan government, represented by the Minister of Kashmir Affairs, Nawab Gurmani, and the Kashmiri leaders, POK Kashmiri leaders, represented by Sikandar, represented by the president of POK and the Muslim Conference chairman. Now, this agreement, under this agreement, POK is supposed to have ceded this control of northern area to Pakistan. This was, agreement was kept secret for 3 decades because Pakistan had changed the territorial status quo of this area without plebiscite, which was a violation of UN Security Council resolution. This came to light in a historic judgment of POK High Court in 1993, which described, and I'll show you the exact wordings in the slide presentation, that this was a violation of UN Security Council resolution by Pakistan. Now, this is one version of truth. Pakistan has many versions of truth. One of my favorite American actor, he was a comedian, and there was a movie in the 90s. This movie that shows that the fellow is caught by his second wife with his third girlfriend, and when confronted with the wife, he tries to give some explanation which she, angrily rejects. So this fellow very delicately says there are versions of truth, and the wife retorts, truth has no versions, there's only one truth. Now, Karachi Agreement is a version of truth which Pakistan hid for 3 decades. And it now talks about it only because it has been disclosed despite Pakistan government. But there is a truth which is different, and the truth is what is told by Major Brown. Who was Major Brown? Major Brown was a British officer of Gilgit Scouts, which was a militia force, part of Maharaja's state forces, and British had treated this area, this is a strategic area, you can see the location. It touches Kashmir, China here, Tibet, there was no China, but Tibet. It touches Afghanistan, across this is Central Asia, which was then part of Soviet Union. So because of the proximity to Soviet Union and China and Afghanistan, British treated this as a strategic area, which it is, and had effectively controlled it directly, even though legally it was part of Maharaja's territories. Its strategic importance you can understand from the fact that without Pakistani control of northern area, which they are now called GilgitBaltistan, there would have been no China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. CPEC, as it is called, enters Pakistan through this territory. From, this is China-controlled territory, it enters here. And Indus River, which is the main source of irrigation in Pakistan, that also enters Pakistan through northern area. So this is strategically very important. And Pakistan got geographical contiguity with China with its control of this territory, and India lost geographical contiguity with Afghanistan because this is Wakhan Strip, which was drawn by British strategists in the 19th century to separate their colonial position from the advancing Tsarist empire. So we lost this, and we have to depend on Iran and Chabahar as that context. But now coming back to so Major Brown, most of the fighting when it started in 47, this took place in this area. This was very easy for Pakistan to move the tribals here. There was very little fighting here. So this area went to Pakistan because of this British officer who raised a flag of revolt on 1st November 1947 and arrested Brigadier Ghansara Singh, who was the governor appointed by Maharaja, and called Pakistan government to send a representative to take over part of this, to take over this territory. That representative was a Tehsildar of NWFP. NWFP is what is called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa now, Muhammad Alam, and he arrived on 17 November, and Major Brown handed over the territory to him. Now, why was this territory handed over to a representative of NWFP, which was part of Pakistan, when the Azad Kashmir government, we don't recognize them, Pakistan recognizes them, and Azad Kashmir government was declared on 24th October, 3 weeks ago, earlier. So, right from the beginning, Pakistan wanted to separate this area for its strategic reason and simply land grab, the biggest chunk, and it was easy because there is very little population. Now, let's turn to the main story, as they call it, because when they call of Azad Kashmir, they were only talking of this slum. Now, Pakistan maintained in the UN Security Council that it had nothing to do with the tribal invasion. Colonel Akbar Khan, who actually planned tribal invasion and led it from inside, he was a serving officer of Pakistan Army. He headed Weapons Directorate in Pakistan Army headquarters in Rawalpindi. And he has, in his memoirs, which are very aptly titled Raiders in Kashmir, he has described how he was asked to plan for this invasion, and the plan was approved in a meeting chaired by Pakistan's Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan. And he has given an account of 4 meetings over 3 months period. And of course, Akbar Khan later became advisor to Prime Minister. And he led the tribals, so-called tribals, well, they were tribals, but with lot of training by Pakistan Army and officered by Pakistan Army. He led the tribals under the pseudonym of General Tariq. So his account clearly shows that this was an external aggression by tribals. It was no indigenous uprising. And why it was chosen, he had suggested an indigenous uprising. He had suggested 3 plans. One plan was that Pakistan should cut off, India's access to Kashmir by attacking Jammu. The second was inciting an internal rebellion in Kashmir. And third was tribal invasion. The first 2 were rejected because Pakistan government then and now and Pakistan army is very wary or scared of, taking on Indian army. So the first would have, the frontal attack would have provoked the Indian army, and they wanted to avoid it. The second one was not possible because National Conference, the main force in the territory, political force with India. So they settled on this tribal invasion. Now, another person who took part in this drama, his name was Muhammad Yusuf Sarraf. He was a Muslim Conference activist. Muslim Conference was a counterpart to National Conference, and he has played a major role in POK's creation. Pakistan, India got independence on 15th August. Kashmir acceded to, and the tribal invasion began around 20th October. Kashmir acceded to India on 26th October. GilgitBaltistan, northern area, Major Brown raised the flag of revolt on 1st November. This is the chronology. So between August 47 and October 47, there was a 2 months interregnum when this whole state of Maharaja Hari Singh was not part of either India or Pakistan because he was, taking his time. Now, during this period, the Muslim Conference Working Committee decided on an independent Kashmir under the Maharaja. And this Yusuf Sarraf got reversed next day in the general body meeting in favor of accession to Pakistan. So I'm not quoting a BJP or Hindutva figure, I'm quoting a POK figure who has played a major role in Pakistan's favor. And he has described his discussion with Sardar Ibrahim, the first president of POK. And Sardar Ibrahim told him that he declared provisional government of Azad Kashmir on the night of 24th October on the basis of 2 phone calls received from Rawalpindi. Why the phone calls came from Rawalpindi and not Karachi? Karachi was the national capital of Pakistan till 1961. Rawalpindi because Rawalpindi then as now was the headquarters of Pakistan Army. Now the callers were Khwaja Rahim, Commissioner, Rawalpindi Division, and Begum Naseem, the then wife of this military adventurer, Colonel Akbar Khan, who was leading the tribal invasion inside. So again, there is no indigenous uprising where a middle-level civilian officer and the wife of a colonel decides on formation of a government. Now, Yusuf Sarraf has made another observation that no Kashmiri leader was consulted about this tribal invasion. And of course, Kashmiri leaders to date are very angry because the tribals, they were Pathans, they looted and raped and plundered everyone. Now, the next step in this drama was when India took this issue to United Nations on 1st January 1948. Now, UN adopted a resolution. Security Council appointed a commission called UN Commission on India and Pakistan, UNCEP. Next slide. Now, UNCEP, this was a UN body. They came to India and Pakistan, and they adopted this resolution of August 1948. It had three parts: ceasefire, truce arrangements, which was two parts: Pakistan's obligations and India's obligations, and third was plebiscite. Now, ceasefire went into effect on 1st January 49, 6 months later. This was, about withdrawal of forces. Now, this says the government of Pakistan agrees to withdraw its troops from that state. So this was not simply UN asking Pakistan to withdraw. It was based on express agreement given in writing by Pakistan government that they'll withdraw. And not only its troops, but also tribesmen, Pakistani nationals. And they were to withdraw, Pakistan was asked to withdraw all its forces. The difference was, and in case of India, it was part of the forces. Now, this difference is the closest United Nations came to recognizing that Pakistan had no locus standi. It had no invitation. There was no wishes of the people, the slogan they keep raising. It was a tribal invasion, so they asked them to withdraw all its forces. And the fact that it asked India to maintain part of the forces to assist the state government in holding a plebiscite. And incidentally, again, many people or most people in foreign service also don't know, the plebiscite was to be held under the authority of the state government, not under the authority of the UN. This is why, anyway, I don't have time to go into those details. Now, plebiscite came at the end of this process, three-stage process. And this became Pakistan's problem because the first stage required them to withdraw completely. And they didn't want to give up their illegal land grab. Now, this has been part of this continuing story. Now, let me come to the second part, which is very little known and which has a huge significance to date, and that is the issue of plebiscite. You must have heard, there's general impression that India promised plebiscite and then Nehru got cold feet and, turned it down. Plebiscite has been talked about on many occasions, but there were only three formal occasions when it was actually a concrete proposal was made. And on all three occasions, India was willing to consider it. It was Pakistan which rejected it. And I have brought it out on the basis of neutral observers' writings. The first one was, Alan Campbell Johnson, the press attaché of Mountbatten. He's written a book, Mission with Mountbatten. 2nd November 1947. By that time, the Indian Army had moved in at the request of Maharaja. So the balance of forces had changed against Pakistan. So Mountbatten basically tried to convince Jinnah that, your attempt for a preemptive land grab. But, the Pakistan's game was, state forces were very weak. So 7,000-8,000 ill-trained under British officer who actually connived with Pakistan. He scattered them in small units all over. And it's a huge territory. So invasion was coming from the north and they were sitting all over. West and they were all over. So the calculation was to grab Kashmir before India moved in. So Mountbatten said that is over now. So your best bet is to accept a plebiscite under UN's auspices. Now this is exactly what has since then become and remains Pakistan's official position. Jinnah rejected it. Jinnah suggested a bilateral plebiscite to be organized by the two Governor Generals. Mountbatten said that as constitutional head he could not accept it. Now, why didn't Jinnah accept this golden opportunity offered to him on a platter of, fulfilling Pakistan's official position? Because the tribal invasion was still on, and tribals had looted, plundered, and killed Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, alike without discrimination. There's, this famous story of rape of nuns in a convent in Baramulla. So Jinnah knew that the vote will go against Pakistan, so he turned it down. The second opportunity arose in 1950. Owen Dixon was appointed as UN mediator. He was an Australian jurist, came to the subcontinent, suggested a regional plebiscite. He said a single plebiscite across the entire, state will leave pockets of minority on either sides of political divide and lead to forced migration of minorities, which was already happening on a massive scale all over the subcontinent. To avoid it, he suggested regional plebiscite and limited the scope to valley because he said in other areas, given the composition of the population, it was known which way they'll go. Pakistan should have jumped at it because if you accept Pakistan's position that Muslims of Kashmir wanted to join Pakistan, then the advantage was most pronounced in the valley where 70% of population was Muslim. Pakistan turned it down. Now this has been rejected. This has been reported. I've quoted, from in my book from a report of Owen Dixon to the UN. He has said that India was willing to consider the proposal. Pakistan rejected it on the ground that this was a departure from the principle of single plebiscite. In the same paragraph, and this I think for the first time my book brings out, this has been in public domain for more than 7 decades. And the first part is known that Pakistan rejected it, but the second part, which people did not notice. Owen Dixon has written the same para, but I'm given the impression that Pakistan is willing to join a partition of the state, provided it got the valley. Now, what is the importance of significance of this sentence? Pakistan was willing to depart from the principle of single plebiscite, provided it got the valley and it got the valley without a vote. So, single plebiscite was simply a pretext, an excuse. Now, the third and the most telling episode, and this is something which completely demolishes A.G. Noorani thesis. A.G. Noorani thesis is, which you some of you may have read, that by 49 he quotes Mrs. Gandhi's letter to her father. The situation in the valley had changed, so Nehru developed cold feet, and this is why he rejected plebiscite in 1954, using the excuse, as Noorani puts it, that Pakistan has joined this military bloc. Now, 8th August 1953, Sheikh Abdullah was dismissed and arrested. Pakistan proposed bilateral talks. India was not very keen, but accepted it. Pakistani Prime Minister Muhammad Ali Bogra came. Bogra Nehru signed a joint communique which is in public domain, which committed both sides to plebiscite. Bogra went back. On 1st December 1953, he wrote a letter to Nehru, going back on the promise he had made 3 months earlier, rejected plebiscite. And the same ground, that this is a regional plebiscite is a departure from the principle of single plebiscite. Now, as I have explained, that this was only an excuse because they were willing to make a departure provided they got the valley through partition without a vote. Now, what was the reason why Pakistan was repeatedly going back on its own official position of plebiscite under UN's auspices? That you have to look into the internal situation. Next slide. This is a hidden chapter of which is completely forgotten in India. This is Sudan Revolt. In April 1950, Sardar Ibrahim, the first president of POK, was dismissed by Pakistan government. Sardar Ibrahim incidentally was an accidental president. He was a minor functionary. He was an assistant prosecutor, attorney general or something under Maharaja, and minor functionary of Muslim conference. But because the Muslim conference chairman Sardar Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas was prison in Srinagar. So this fellow got a chance, became president. He was dismissed in uh, in April 1950, a month before Owen Dixon came. And that was the beginning of Sudan revolt by his tribe. They were a martial tribe. It spread all over the state and continued for almost a decade. This is a quotation taken from a memorandum submitted by Muslim Conference, which was a main political force, to Pakistan Constituent Assembly in 1955. Now you can't have a more authoritative document than something presented to Pakistan Constituent Assembly. And this was presented by Krishnan Menon, India's defense minister, in a debate in UN Security Council to Security Council in 1957. Pakistani foreign minister, who was a very voluble figure, Sir Zafrullah Khan, was present, did not demur, so obviously this was correct. It was accepted and circulated as a UN document. Now, please read what it says. Have been subjected to torture and terrorization. Last few years, that has been going on since 50. Great torture, terrorization, ruthless and random firing by mortar guns. In Indian state of J&K, unfortunately, there have been occasions when there has been police firing or security forces, but never heavy. Mortar is a heavy caliber gun used against civilians. Next. So women have not only been raped, but mistreatment of women. Oh, sorry, am I?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. But in some cases and so on, and mistreatment with teenage boys. Terrorized by this situation, 3,000 people have gone over to the Indian side of the ceasefire line. These are all Muslims. Now, very curiously, this document, which was circulated as a UN document, was then classified by someone. The only purpose could be to avoid embarrassment to Pakistan, and this disappeared from public memory. I have managed to get it declassified by the UN. It is now available on the UN website. So this tells you why Pakistan was not willing to accept plebiscite, and it was Pakistan which rejected plebiscite, especially the December 53 when Bogra went back. Plebiscite is bilateral; it cannot be held unilaterally. Nehru got the blame because he, unfortunately, 4 months later it was already dead, but he again made a statement. So, the people who want to run him down, like Noorani, they are blaming him on this. Now, next. Now, after that, while on the Indian side in 1952, election was held for Constituent Assembly. 1957, J&K Assembly adopted a constitution. On the Pakistani side, for next 23 years, that area was run without any elections as a department of Ministry of Kashmir Affairs on the basis of rules of business. What are rules of business is a phrase common in Indian bureaucracy. Also, these are departmental rules. So it was an extension of the Department of Ministry of, the Azadi and wishes of the people. Two slogans which resonate in the Pakistani positions are nowhere reflected in the structure of control they built in that territory. Now this, I'm showing you an internal document which is, I have quoted that, it's now in public domain. This is Ghulam Ishaq Khan as Cabinet Secretary. He issued this, in May 1971. And who was Ghulam Ishaq Khan? He later became President of Pakistan, and one of the most powerful presidents who dismissed two prime ministers, Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif. So in 71, he was a Cabinet Secretary. And what is he saying? The direction is that every ministry in the field of its responsibility should look upon and deal with Azad Kashmir as if it were another administrative unit of the country. So the fiction they have invented in international fora is that they are keeping EOK separate because they are good law-abiding citizens, So till the plebiscite is held and UN resolutions are implemented, it's not shown as part of Pakistan. But here internally the instructions were to deal as if it were another administrative unit of the country. Now, this was followed by 71 war, and that changed the political landscape. And there were three developments in quick succession: Shimla Agreement, Pakistan's constitution, this was the third in the current constitution adopted in 1973, and POK Interim Constitution of 1974. Now, Shimla, replying to debate on Shimla Agreement in Pakistan National Assembly on 14 July 1972, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the then president of Pakistan, and he was one of those who knew UN very well, he admitted in a candid confession that UN resolutions do not support Pakistan's case. Can you? I think it's somewhere down the line. No. Yes. That was a day, that was a moment when you jeopardize the right of self-determination in Jammu and Kashmir. What was he referring to? I quoted, the passages, I don't have time. He was referring to UN Security Council resolution of April 1948. This is before UNCEP resolution came. And that Security Council resolution had also asked Pakistan to withdraw. And plebiscite was to come at the end of the process. So this was Pakistan's dilemma from the beginning. They didn't want to let go their ill-gotten gain. Now, Mr. Bhutto, a very clever man, he was basically a feudal lord from Sindh. So his whole mindset was zameen, land. So he has boiled down in his mind, the whole question is boiled down to who gets the territory. So he says that this, normally there's no equation between withdrawal and right of self-determination, but he equated it. And he said it was then and then that you jeopardize the right of self-determination in Jammu and Kashmir. And of course, being what he was misrepresenting this also, because none of the UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir have this phrase right of self-determination. It was an issue of plebiscite. There's a huge difference between the two concepts. Plebiscite is a more limited concept. It's a choice between two states. It's a right of state as a subject in international law. Right of self-determination is part of human rights, an individual's right. This is a theory which came into being much later. In 1948, the year when Kashmir issue went to the Security Council, that year was also when Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. This is the foundational document of human rights. And Universal Declaration of Human Rights has no mention of right of self-determination. So right of self-determination did not form part of international law. It has a very faint echo in UN Charter. Why? Because the two of the framers of the UN Charter, UK and France, had huge colonies. So there was no reference, but but this was an admission. Now, what is the significance? Because soon after signing Shimla Agreement, which had committed the two countries not to change the territorial status quo through use of force, basically accept the status quo. That this is under your control, this is under India's control. They went back on it, reselected the UN resolutions and said that UN Charter supersedes any bilateral agreement. So those resolutions are still valid. But even if you concede that, here was the President of Pakistan saying that those resolutions do not support your case, Pakistan's case. Next. Now, can you go next? Oh. Yes. Now, 73 Constitution of Pakistan, which has been since then, suspended many times, Zia's coup, Musharraf's coup, and it has mostly been observed in abeyance. But it has served a purpose for the Pakistani people and the civilian populations. It has established a benchmark. So to that extent, it has broadened the scope of civil liberties. That has not happened in case of POK. In case of POK Interim Constitution, Pakistan actually, it's a very strange thing. constitutions everywhere define the powers and functions of elected assembly and elected government. POK's constitution defines the powers of Pakistan within POK. So the individual or the Kashmiri is no part of that. POK constitution is very vague about the Kashmiriyat or Kashmiri identity. It has a very strong element of, it doesn't, this is the only provision about who is a Kashmiri. This is borrowed from Maharaja's government, state subject definition. Now it has three caveats. A person for the time being residing in Azad Jammu and Kashmir or Pakistan, for the time being, which means it's in a flux. You know, there's this current debate on delimitation in Jammu and Kashmir, and there's this accusation that government is trying to change the demographic composition. This is built into POK's constitution that you can either be a resident of Pakistan or residing. You know, no link to that you are born there. You are residing either in Pakistan or Kashmir, and that is good enough to be a Kashmiri. And for the time, and as defined in government notification, as amended from time to time. Now, Maharaja had devised this notification for a particular purpose. You know, this was a son of soil theory, to keep the property rights with the Kashmiris and with the Kashmiri Hindu Dogras. You know, people forget when there is a debate on 370 that there is this other aspect also, that the Dogras didn't want to part with their landed states. So this was a big thing of this. Now, he amended it only once. So as amended from time to time, who amended it and what was that amendment? So basically Pakistan has done away completely with the distinction between Pakistani and Kashmiri, changed the demographic composition. And in fact, the constitution follows the developments on the ground. The biggest change came over in 1960s when Mangla Dam was constructed, en masse displacement of Kashmiris, the so-called Mirpuris in UK. They are basically people who are displaced from there. Next. Right. Now this is again something which Pakistan voices. Now you read this. This says, no person, political party is allowed, permitted to propagate against and so on, detrimental to the ideology of the state's accession to Pakistan. Now, plebiscite gives two choices: accession to Pakistan or accession to India. This boils it down to only one choice. And if you take the wider concept of right to self-determination, it has three choices, including independence option. Now, this definition, which is built into the constitution, presents the outcome of plebiscite as predetermined conversion, accession to Pakistan. Now, this has been replicated in the election law of Kashmir and in the oath which has to be taken by every office bearer or member of the Legislative Assembly. So essentially this has been used to completely curb activities of organizations or individuals who want independence. JKLF or Yasin Malik fame, Yasin Malik and JKLF, they were used as a vanguard to stir trouble on the Indian side in the early 90s on giving the slogan of Azadi. In Pakistan, JKLF to date has never been allowed to take part in any elections. 1985 elections in Pakistan and POK were on non-party basis. But even as individuals, they were not allowed. 89 elections, JKLF they themselves said, "Hum nahi karenge." But this was, basically face savings. They are not allowed. And JKLF founder, Amanullah Khan, he has given an interview to Human Rights Watch. You must have heard of this organization based in New York sometime in 2006, and crying. Human Rights Watch and other NGOs were given access for the first time to POK in 2005 after the earthquake there. And what he was pleading, he was saying that, they have opened up the way. So you are here, we can talk of our plight, but, आप चले जाएंगे तो हमारा क्या होगा? And he has described that how his party and other parties and members were beaten, tortured, harassed, not allowed to take part in any elections. Now, this is the beginning. Oh, next. Now, okay, just go. Now the most interesting part, the heart of this constitution. Don't look at this slide. This is a subsequent thing. This is a Article 31 of POK Constitution. What Pakistan did, there was an elected assembly which came into being after this constitution was adopted. Elections were held in 75. And Pakistan created a parallel body called Kashmir Council, headed by Pakistan's Prime Minister. So, under POK's constitution, Article 31, all powers were vested in the Kashmir Council, headed by Pakistani Prime Minister. And Article 31 says that powers, the other powers which are not enumerated in this, will be exercised by the state assembly. So the state elected assembly was left with undefined powers, and all the defined powers were vested in council. Now, what were those powers? All the powers over taxation, powers over water, and powers over highways. Now, water and highways are the two main resources of POK and Gilgit-Baltistan, because strategic area connectivity, CPEC passes through it. At that time, there was no CPEC, but basically highways was. So everything is under Pakistani control. In case of J&K, I have not done these, comparisons in my book, but just for your interest. The Indian government gives subsidies. Now, we had once calculated, this is when I was in the ministry, early 90s, that per capita assistance given to J&K was 6 times higher than the national average. There was a statement by EM Dr. Jaishankar 3 years back. He said it's now 10 times higher. Now, what is the situation in Pakistan? The budget is based, the 80% of the tax revenue raised from the territory is reverted to them. 20% is kept back by Pakistan as service charges. So not only there are no subsidies, it actually takes away some money. And what is the budget spent on? The social sectors are nominal. It's basically, spent on building roadways and so on, which is needed for Pakistan military movement. Now, this was, this was called rule by proxy by Kashmir Council. Now, this was much criticized, and it has since been changed. I'll come to that in a while, but let me just move to the next step in this drama. In 1993, go back. Yes, this is that judgment I told you in the beginning. POK High Court gave this judgment that you return the territory grabbed by Pakistan in violation of Security Council resolution to POK. Of course, this has never been implemented, and it was overturned. Got overturned by Supreme Court on purely jurisdictional grounds, that High Court doesn't have jurisdiction over territorial issue because High Court is a creature of the Constitution, and the Constitution does not define what are the limits of POK. So now, but this had it set off a chain reaction. There was a huge embarrassment in the UN because this was a time when Pakistan had moved resolutions on Kashmir issue in General Assembly and Commission on Human Rights. I was part of India's lobbying efforts. But internally, because of the embarrassment, Benazir Bhutto created a Northern Area Council. It was still called Northern Area. Now, in 1999, people of the northern areas filed a case in Pakistan Supreme Court and demanding their fundamental rights. And Supreme Court gave a judgment which came out on May 99, which said that the people of this territory should be given representative government and fundamental rights within a period of 6 months by Pakistan government. So what is the implication? The Supreme Court's judgment clearly implied that there was no representative government, no fundamental rights till then. There is the other part. How was come that Pakistan Supreme Court was delivering judgment over a territory which was not part of Pakistan under its constitution. So obviously they invoked the human rights universality, that human rights are universal, so they invoked that to establish jurisdiction and then gave this judgment. Now this judgment has never been implemented. The first faint, step towards, giving it some shape. It took a decade when in 2009, GilgitBaltistan order was issued by Pakistan government, creating an elected assembly in GilgitBaltistan, which is now the new nomenclature for Northern area. Why change in nomenclature? Because Pakistan wants to take it away as from the historic moorings of this territory, which was part of UK. So in this, they were given limited powers over 61 subjects. Why? Because this is the only Shia majority region in Pakistan, under Pakistan's control. And Zardari was a Shia, so he was sympathetic. Now, this was completely changed. The entire list of 61 subjects was abolished under Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2018, 5 years later. So there were huge protests. The copies of the order were torn in the Gilgit-Baltistan assembly in the presence of Pakistani Prime Minister. I quoted this passage, and this passage is not from any newspaper report. This is from a judgment of Gilgit-Baltistan Supreme Judicial Court, because people went to the court and the court overturned the Gilgit-Baltistan order. Now this was like the historic judgment of POK High Court challenging Pakistan government. And Pakistan government then went in appeal to Pakistan Supreme Court, which has restored the Gilgit-Baltistan order, against which people of that territory were, agitating. Now let me next. Okay. Now under this Gilgit-Baltistan order, all powers are vested in the Prime Minister shall have the exclusive power to make laws with respect to any matter. And it says, the last point, Assembly shall and Prime Minister shall not have power to make laws with respect to any matter not enumerated in the legislative list. So the elected Assembly's powers are undefined. What is not in the list is always a matter of debate. And if the list is too bright, then there's nothing left. So this is what they have done. They have done the same googly with POK. Now this actually makes Gilgit-Baltistan a colony, because they are not vested only in Pakistan. They are vested in the person of Prime Minister of Pakistan. This is like Belgium before the First World War. It was a personal state of King Leopold. It was not even a Belgian colony, so they had no fundamental rights. Incidentally, this marked a step forward. What was that? The earlier order, there was right to life and liberty, which is part of Indian Constitution, part of Constitution everywhere. The life part was left out. So they had no right to life. So this was brought back. So this was, you can say, progressive order, mistake rectified after 50 years. And get back to the previous count. Now this is I was explaining that the POK was being ruled through Kashmir Council, which was headed by PM, Pakistani Prime Minister, and it was criticized as ruled by proxy. So they, in 2018, 13th Amendment of POK Constitution, they relegated Council to advisory role. But its powers were not transferred to the elected assembly. Its powers now are assumed directly by Pakistan. You read this is again the same pattern. Assembly shall have exclusive powers to make laws on any matter not enumerated in Part A. Now in any constitution, when you are delineating the powers, you say these are the powers, you define those powers. Here they are saying what is not defined in the constitution is your power, which means that it's completely, you are in a limbo. Then the next para says the government of Pakistan shall have exclusive power to make laws with respect to any matter enumerated in Part A. So government of Pakistan now sits within the compact of power of POK. and exercises direct legislative powers on 32 powers, subjects, which includes everything from taxation to water to anything which matters. And the remaining 22 subjects, the next paragraph, the Assembly shall, with the consent of the government of Pakistan, make laws with respect to any matters enumerated. So even there, they need Pakistan government's approval. Now, POK, being more populous, has been able to assert itself more than Gilgit-Baltistan. They have been also treated with more tolerance because they are a Sunni majority area in a Sunni majority state. So this last part is not there in Gilgit-Baltistan order, which I have just shown you. Next, there is a list of items where need Pakistan's approval, but they can legislate. There even that is not there. Next. No, just go back. Make laws with respect to any matter. This just leaves at that the assembly, elected assembly in Gilgit-Baltistan can make laws in any matter not enumerated in the legislative list. So POK has a slightly better this thing. Next. Now I started my talk, talking about plebiscite. There is a difference between plebiscite and self-determination. I explained self-determination as a larger concept includes independence. This concept didn't exist in 1948 or 47. It's not there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This has rewriting history backwards, which Pakistan now raises. Now, one of Pakistan's biggest supporters was UK. This is how partition was, made and how, Kashmir issue was created. This is UK's statement on Cyprus question in 57. Question of circumstances in which the principle of self-determination could be applied and so on was clearly an internal matter for that state itself. Any infringement by the UN of that fundamental principle would be regarded by the UK government as ultra-vires and completely unacceptable. So there is no recognition of, that you can interfere. This is just the reverse of what, many of these governments are doing now. But when it came to UK's territorial interest, and Cyprus was a UK colony, it was, a definition of state, it has to be a contiguous area. Cyprus sits 1,000 kilometers away. It was given to UK under Treaty of Saint Stefano in 1878 or something. And this is not the only statement. They have been making the statement on the Cyprus issue since 48. There's an internal part, within Pakistan. I have shown you that UK constitution, self-determination is, in the wider sense, is not allowed. There's a historic background, and I have reverted to this towards the end of my book, because 48, this concept didn't exist, but now the concept has been developed. So I have debated it in terms of the larger scope also, which exists now. But there also Pakistan runs into contradiction. Pakistan and Muhammad Ali Jinnah always backed the rulers. Pakistan was a creation of British, and British rule was not based on consent of the ruled. Now Muhammad Ali Jinnah had another motive, and that was to encourage balkanization of India, because of the 560 princely states, most of them were located in India. There are only 9 of them or 8 of them which were in Pakistan. So on the eve of partition, after partition was announced by Mountbatten on 3rd June, Muhammad Ali Jinnah has given a statement in July 47 saying that only ruler can states to take their own time and decide their own this thing instead of joining Indian Constituent Assembly. Now, if you take that position, then the whole Pakistani position collapses on Kashmir, because Maharaja was the ruler, he opted for India. The other way to look at it is India Independence Act of British Parliament, which, on the basis of which independence was granted, it has no reference to people. It only talks about rulers. The reason being, the whole rule was based on, the ruler's wishes and British government's wishes. Next. This is the economic part, and this is the most telling issue. Mangla Dam was constructed in 67. For 36 years, no payment either for water usage or hydropower royalty. When the payments began in 2003, they were paid 15 paisa a unit. For the same molecule of water, Pakistan's provinces get 1 rupee 10 paisa, 7 times higher. Now, this discrimination is justified on the ground that Pakistani provinces are given hydropower royalty, and hydropower royalty can only be given to Pakistan's provinces. And Azad Kashmir is not a part of Pakistan because we are good citizens of the world, so we have kept it separate. Now, POK's distinct status did not come in the way of exploiting its natural resources. That became an issue only when it came to paying for it. Now, the other thing is that, Mangla Dam was constructed 6 years before POK constitution, so they had enough time to reflect this in the constitution.